Hello, friends. Welcome once again. This is another episode of Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health. How's everybody's Thursday going so far? We're rocking and rolling, talking some Syracuse sports with you. That's what we do every Thursday, right around noon-ish Eastern Standard Time. We hop here on the internet and talk sports. What a concept, right? But the beauty of being here live, if you are watching us live, because some people do watch the show later on replay via YouTube, which is cool. You know, we appreciate that. But the beauty of being here live is your questions, your comments throughout the show, answer, be a part of the conversation, just like you are on our post-game shows. We did a post-game show last night, as usual, after Syracuse took down Florida State in basketball, something we'll certainly be discussing here. And the Orange get a little bit of a break here at the point of a season, and it's a good time for a deep breath for a number of reasons for Syracuse basketball at this point, as we will discuss. We've got all the channels on, football channel on. We got a little football to discuss here. We know when the spring football game is, and some news this week to get into, and it is a very busy time for lacrosse coming up here. There is going to be 3 straight games at the JMA Wireless Dome, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, a lacrosse bonanza. So if you're here in Central New York, there you go. No hoops this weekend, but you still got plenty to do. Hope it's better where you are. I mean, we had a gorgeous sunny day in Central New York. If I turn my camera slightly over this way, you would see a gray, drab, pouring rain kind of day here in Central New York. So hope it's better wherever you're watching today, but at least we got a little sunshine, got a little vitamin D in there yesterday. So we say we jump right in the pool here, and I see Lynn has jumped in and has a question for us. When getting NIL, does that guarantee 4 years of play? That's actually a really good question, Lynn, because I was just reading a story the other day of there was a failed NIL deal that took place at Florida, and they wanted to sign a quarterback. It would have equaled about $12 million a year, and not a year total, pardon me, it would have been $12 million total. That'd be a heck of a deal, even by lofty NIL standards these days. And when I read this story and saw what the contract terms were, it read like a coach's contract, right? This year, you get X amount of money, a bonus if you do X, Y, and Z, right? It doesn't guarantee 4 years. It can be structured that way. And that's why all these athletes that are getting into NIL deals are advised, get a lawyer, right? Have somebody look this over. They have to go through compliance at their particular universities, but the devil's in the details, right? Don't get taken advantage of. Don't sell your rights away. There's so many things in these contracts that these kids, and they are kids, need to know and need to be aware of. So it does not guarantee 4 years. It's pretty much a year-to-year thing, because if you're throwing big NIL money at players, they're typically only going to be around for a couple of years. Football, they have to stay a certain amount of time. Basketball, they can be one and dones, as we know. So that's a great question, and it all depends on the contract, and you can get some seedy characters out there throwing money at you. So my firm advice to any of these athletes getting into it is consult the advice and services of an attorney. Make sure you go through compliance. Do not sign a thing until you know exactly how you're getting paid and what the circumstances of the contract are, what you're being asked to do. You know, in terms of Adam Weitzman here in Syracuse, it's pretty much a trade-off for charity work. The 315 Collective, which is Syracuse's own NIL collective, same thing. But then you have just, athletes that cut deals to sell merchandise and get a percentage of that, right? So a lot of athletes, what I like about NIL, Lynn, is a lot of athletes will just build their brand on social media, and they'll do it themselves, which I think is the beauty of name, image, and likeness, in that, you're in college to learn the business world, to learn about the real world, and to learn to market yourself and profit off your name, image, and likeness, and be entrepreneurial. Did I say that right? I can never say that word. To be an entrepreneur about that. And, sell t-shirts or sell appearances or do camps or, whatever you can come up with that I'm not thinking of at this moment. I think is a great thing when it comes to NIL, which I am in firm favor of, yet we know we're kind of in the Wild West here and determining what the regulations are, what the rules are, and what exactly can get you in trouble. That's a fear a lot of Syracuse fans have. When Weitzman was flying in Elijah Moore, the basketball recruit who committed to Syracuse, class of 2024 coming up. Like, can you do this? Can you go pick up a recruit on a private plane, fly him in, sit him courtside with a couple of, in this case, it was rappers, but you've got all kinds of celebrities and movie stars and athletes coming in, sitting courtside. Everybody's kind of sitting there saying, can you do this? Right. And we don't know the firm answers to that. So I know that Syracuse recently amended its NIL policy. My colleague, Chris Carlson, here at syracuse.com has been doing a great job covering this. And you're going to see some updates on that coming up here shortly. I think even today you might see an update on that. So ever-evolving world, and one you got to keep up on for sure. There's my guy Brian checking in from Massachusetts. A gourmet lunch of Cheerios and peanut butter toast. Light rain and snow there. Lorraine saying, do you know if any of the current Syracuse basketball players have their own NIL deals? And if so, how much they're making? And what about the Syracuse women's basketball players? You guys are bringing it today. I love it. So 6 current players have NIL deals on the men's side. I'm not sure what the totals are. I think some of them do fluctuate based on certain marks they have to meet, how much charity work they do, and how many sponsors they have. Like last year, Buddy Boeheim was making, I don't know the exact amount, but he had about, last I checked, 12 or 13 different NIL deals in Central New York alone. So 6 players have it. One little nugget there that people forget, Jesse Edwards is not eligible for name, image, and likeness at this point. There's different rules with international players. Jesse's from the Netherlands, and I think they're still trying to square that away. So he's not on that list. As far as the women go, Daisha Fair, who just hit 2,500 career points and has just come in and made a massive impact on Syracuse women's basketball, along with a number of other transfers. And of course, Coach Jack. She, according to Adam Weitzman, now figures were not given here, devil's in the details, as they say, but Adam Weitzman recently put on his Instagram that she has one of the more significant NIL deals in the ACC. So they are spreading the wealth there. It is going to women's players. I know that Megan Carney from the Syracuse women's lacrosse team has some NIL deals. I'm actually going over to talk to some Syracuse women's lacrosse players when we're done here. I'll bring that up. I'll ask her about that. I don't know if she'll tell me how much she's making, but it's a new world we're in. And that's what I like about NIL, because we talk so much about football and basketball, right? But lacrosse has a strong following. I look at sports like field hockey that have a passionate following. One of the most highly paid athletes in terms of NIL, and I forget her name. Pardon me for forgetting her name off the top of my head, but there's a gymnast at UCLA who's been a star on social media for her routines, and just she's really connected with a younger audience. She's making millions, right? So it doesn't have to be, the mainstream sports, if you will, that are going to, the quarterback's always going to cash in, and men's basketball, women's basketball is obviously very popular. And there's a number of sports that if you reach a passionate enough audience, they'll find you, they'll support you, they'll buy your merch, and whatever other ways that you can put yourself out there with the opportunity to cash in here. Tim's in Illinois saying, go Orange. It's up there, Tim. Brian jumps back in to say, I thought last night's chat about the conundrum between going pro and tolling in the G League or staying in school for NIL money was intriguing. Brian, let's bring that back up here as we put Rob's comment on the screen, which people can take in, and we'll discuss that as well. It is fascinating to me because you have a player. Let's just use this team for an example. I think people are starting to look at Judah Mintz as a potential pro, right? And will he dip his toe into the waters, and players can, after the season, they can get an assessment. I forget the exact name of the program, but the NBA will evaluate you, and they'll send you a report and basically say, this is where, if you went in the draft, we think you'd get picked, right? And then based on that, they put their name in the draft, they stay in the draft, they go through the camps, they go to the NBA Combine in Chicago, which, remember, you have to be invited to, and you go through the whole process. Now, think of some players that are pros. I think of Cole Swider and Buddy Boeheim from last year's team, right? Jimmy Boeheim is playing he was in Greece, but now I believe he's in, I want to say Yugoslavia. He recently changed where he's playing pro basketball. So do you go and play pro basketball in these leagues and make good money, or stay at Syracuse and have an Adam Weitzman, for example, or whoever wants to step up to the plate, pay you more NIL money? If it's just about money, A guy like Judah Mintz is worth paying, I don't know, I'll throw a number out there, $100,000 to stick around for another year. So that way, the temptation of the G League, at least you can push it away for another year. Whereas before, obviously, you couldn't make a dime based on being a student athlete. So I think we're going to start to see that the sample size on that really isn't big enough because it's only been about a year and change. But I'm curious how that's going to affect the NBA draft. It's certainly helping matters in college football. You're seeing a lot more players that would have left early that are staying. As Syracuse lost a couple of guys in Sean Tucker and Matthew Bergeron, notably Garrett Williams, that went early because, look, they're going to get drafted and they're going to make money as NFL players and they're ready to move on with their careers. But certainly all three of those guys could certainly make some NIL money if they stayed, right? So it is a fascinating discussion, Brian, and I appreciate you bringing it up. Back to Rob's question here, speaking of football. Boy, you guys are bringing great questions. We haven't even touched on basketball yet. We're 11 minutes in the show, but that's fine. You guys are bringing up some good stuff here. As discussed many times, Syracuse football offseason coaching carousel has been a little bumpy. Syracuse made an interesting hire with Steve Farmer to coach the offensive line. What are your thoughts on this? Any connection to Anai and now Beck in the philosophy that's being established here? On Farmer in particular, Rob, I think he got caught up last year at Tulsa. Steve Montgomery was in his last year there. As it turned out, he got fired. And, sometimes guys just, get caught in coaching changes, transitions, and, you go where the jobs are, right? Prior to Tulsa, he was at Texas Tech, and he did a terrific job there. He cranked out 6 all Big 12 players, knows the position. He's been an offensive coordinator. What I like about Farmer in particular, Rob, is he's been an offensive coordinator. So he relates it to the offensive line as a part of the offense as a whole. Not that Mike Schmidt and other guys can't do that, but I think that's an edge that you have. And Dino really went all in on bringing in guys that have experience out there. Now, Jason Beck was elevated, and there's a good mix there. But Rocky Long, 72-year-old mastermind of the 3-3-5 defense, right? There is some young blood coming into. Travis Fisher, who played 9 years in the National Football League, is going to coach cornerbacks now. Nunzio Campanelli from Rutgers was at Rutgers, but is really noted for being huge in the New Jersey high school football realm. That was a big move, right? So I thought it was a really interesting recovery, is the word I'll use, from losing 5 coaches that, speaking of which, so we find out this week that Tony White is going to get paid $1 million a year at Nebraska. He's also the associate head coach in addition to being the defensive coordinator. And it made me think, like, if Syracuse really had to, they could pay Tony White $1 million. Some people scoff at that and say Syracuse doesn't pay. By the way, I was one of them that said it when Robert and I and Tony White left Syracuse on the same day. I don't think Syracuse is still on the level of some of even schools in the ACC total, top to bottom. Certainly not with the Alabamas of the world, but that's a very, very short list that can pay coaches. And by the way, Nick Saban loses offensive coordinators every year. Right? It's like the defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts. It's just every year it's somebody different. So he's used to transition. But Tony White also said when he left, he did an exclusive interview with our Emily Leiker, who does a spectacular job covering football for syracuse.com. And one thing he cited in that conversation was personal reasons, right? There were family reasons why he took the Nebraska job. And the reasons that he has never quite disclosed, which is certainly his right and his prerogative. Maybe we'll just not know that. But how strong were those family reasons, considering if push came to shove? I think Syracuse would have matched that offer. I think they could match that offer. I mean, that's steep for Syracuse, and that's the problem, that it's steep to pay a coordinator who's worth it $1 million a year at this point. But there's other factors coming into play. Syracuse it's still a developmental school in terms of coaches and athletes. You develop a Deuce Chestnut, he gets plucked by LSU in the transfer portal, right? You brought in some players, Jaden Gold notably from Notre Dame, that fit that description too. So it's just kind of a circle process there. But a good question, Rob. And, when you look to replace coaches, Dino was talking about this earlier this week. He was on the ACC network with Andrea Adelson and David Hale, saying, okay, how do you upgrade? How do you make that position better if you can from the last person who was there. And Syracuse is still in this kind of developmental stage where they have to be, almost have to be careful about developing people, because someone's going to come along and take them and pay them more money. So great question with football in the year. And I was really intrigued by that Tony White story that Emily wrote. So check that out. And it kind of makes you think about the resources that Syracuse is just still limited on when it comes to competing, not only in the world of college football, but even within the confines of the ACC. All right, let's get to some hoops. Great conversation last night, as Brian noted on the postgame show, but I kind of want to zoom out a little bit. So if you have any thoughts on the Florida State game itself, certainly jump in on that. Judah Mintz takes over in the second half. Girard with 26 points. Jesse Edwards, overcame a little bit of a slow start. He ends up with 18 points. Syracuse had just two guys in the first half show up, if you will, in Girard and Edwards. They're down by 6 at halftime. They were out rebounded by 8 at halftime. They stormed the rim. Judah Mintz was so aggressive. And this is a guy that missed a couple of dunks in the game, looked out of sorts, but just finds a way to adjust, finds a way to settle down, listens to his coach. There was some great comments that Jim Boeheim made in his post-game press conference last night. No apologies or clarifications necessary from this one, as we'll talk about here shortly. But I think they took care of business in that one, right? The post-game interview, Chuck, was a little bit more personable. Yeah, I noticed that. I wrote that in my column today. Jim seemed to be on his best behavior last night. Certainly he had this past week in mind going to that post-game press conference. And I thought he was very insightful, as a matter of fact, right? That's what he can do. Right? That's what he can do every post-game press conference. Nothing wrong with being irritated if your team lost and discussing your team's play, but you don't have to call out reporters and say people have bad attitudes and just all the nonsense that we see at the press conference, right? So we'll see how long that lasts, considering the gauntlet of games that Syracuse is about to play, which brings me to my next point about basketball, in that this team needs a break, and they're getting it at the right time. They need a break because they have to take a deep breath before they go into a stretch where, starting on Valentine's Day, they will play NC State, the big game against Duke, which I am really curious to see how much of an event that will be, what the crowd will be, what the feel of that will be without Coach K. Duke's not ranked. Duke is still as big of a product in the college basketball world as you're going to get, so they're still going to attract a lot of buzz and a lot of attention. But the first post-Boeheim versus Krzyzewski Duke game, and Duke is not Duke this year. So that's still a very hard game for Syracuse. Then you get Clemson, who's been the top team in the league this year, followed by Pittsburgh. Those are all good teams. Those are all top of the ACC teams. They're all either quad 1 or quad 2 teams. And when you look at Syracuse, they've got 5 wins on the road in the ACC. That's impressive. But those are all games, and they're all teams that are below them in the standings. You're talking about Notre Dame, Boston College, Florida State, Georgia Tech. It's not a murderer's row. The teams you have upcoming now are going to show you who you really are. Syracuse cannot get in the NCAA tournament without winning the ACC tournament. And what happened last night is they put a tiebreaker over Florida State in their back pocket, because those two are right on the line right now. We still got a month to the ACC tournament, but those two are right on the line determining who gets the bye and who does not, because you do not want to play on Tuesday at the ACC tournament. It's hard enough to win 4 in a row. To win 5 in a row? No, that just ain't going to happen. Right? Virginia Tech made a nice run last year, but that's the anomaly in that situation. So if it comes down to Syracuse and Florida State to determine who's got to play on day 1 or who gets that bye and doesn't have to start till day 2, Syracuse got that win in their back pocket. Boeheim needs a little break, right? It's been a heck of a week with the apologies, the clarifications. Mike Waters wrote a great piece about this, a little conversation with John Wildhack this week, and just everything that happened there. Syracuse won last night despite all that. Jim made a little crack about it at his press conference. Like, I'm glad we win these things so we can prove you guys wrong a little bit, that we're still focused on basketball. But probably good that they'll take a breath after this. Now, Jim's got his radio shows today. He does a radio interview on ESPN Syracuse here locally. Then he does his own show at 7 o'clock tonight. So I would imagine he'll be on his best behavior there again. And I don't want sanitized Jim Boeheim, right? I like that he shoots from the hip. I like that he's honest, but there is a line you can't cross when it just comes to simple respect and behavior towards others. I want opinionated Jim Boeheim on the sport, but you can't, spout off on Pitt and Wake Forest, paying players when they're simply not doing it to the level that, say, a Miami is, right? So everybody just feels like they need a little break. The players get a little break before that grind and the gauntlet of the schedule coming up, and it's good that they have built that in. It's good that they have built in that break. Okay, let's put the focus back on basketball at this point. Kevin says, are the seasons longer now? It seems like there's many more games going into either the NCAA tournament or NIT. If they make a run in the ACC, they could have about 35 games played. They are a little longer now. The tournaments are a little longer. And I'm not sure the exact number, but it does feel like there's a few more games on the schedule. I'm not sure exactly what it is, Kevin, but it's a grind, man. There's still a month to go in this season. There's a month until the ACC tournament. There's 7 games left. Like, this is a time where to get the break now and get a weekend off and really get primed for that 4-game slate coming up here. Timing was really good on that for Syracuse. It's like when we talk about with bye weeks in football, right? Do you get the bye week when you need it? Sometimes the bye comes too early. Sometimes it comes way too late, right? So I think Syracuse is getting a break when they need it. Jimmy's tired about the Boeheim talk. Look, Jimmy, he is the most front-facing central figure, not only for Syracuse athletics, but Syracuse, New York, right? So we can't not talk about it because it may be a subject you disagree with. It comes with the territory, right? If you're the central figure and you bring that attention upon yourself in a lot of cases, then that's how it works, right? If we were talking about Jim Boeheim incessantly because he was like the coach of the year or just got in the Hall of Fame or this team, it was number 1 in the country, I don't think you'd be telling me to stop talking about it, right? Just because it happens to be something that you disagree with or is uncomfortable, right? There's certain levels to this. I'm not trying to be glib here. I'm just saying, like, if we were talking about like Jim Boeheim went on Letterman last night, and not that Letterman's on anymore, but you know what I mean? Like, it was like on a late night talk show and is the talk of the world this week. I don't think anybody would be like, okay, I'm sick of this, right? But just because it's something of his own doing, remember, in this case, he brought up retirement. He brought up Pitt and Wake Forest. He brought up the 95% comment. They came from him. It'd be one thing if I was just going at him. I mean, we talk about his team and evaluate his team, but I appreciate your opinion. I appreciate why we need to move on from that. But I mean, he lit this fire. So you kind of have to let it burn out in its natural course. But that's exactly what we're saying here. They kind of go into the break now, and, we'll see if they can turn some heads, impress some people. We were mentioning the road wins are all teams below them in the standings. Now they get 4 chances in a row to punch up and show like, okay, we're going to fight to the end here. They cannot make the tournament unless they win the tournament, but let's see if they can punch up a little bit here. Scott defining the fine line between opinionated and arrogance. Rob saying tough stretch, but doable. And Aaron shifts the conversation saying hell of a win for the lacrosse team. Let's talk a little lacrosse, shall we, friends? You guys can keep talking about anything we've discussed here and get more hoops comments in there, but let's shift the focus to lacrosse a little bit. So let's start with the men's team. 7-5 win over Vermont. Aaron, I wouldn't call it a hell of a win. I would call it a grinder. I would call it a necessary win. It's a first game of the year. Both teams shaking off rust. Will Mark was a stud in net. He was the ACC Defensive Player of the Week, deservedly. Syracuse has found itself, I think, a true blue goalie here. But what I will say is he cannot survive an onslaught like that against better teams than Vermont. And Vermont's got some good players, but when you start playing the ACC teams, some of the better teams on your schedule, you got to make stops, right? So it just goes to show you the continuing evolution of that defense. But Will Mark was spectacular in that game. Joey Spallina, the debut of the 22, 15 shots, 1 goal. My man, aggressive, can get those shots. There's a lot of good news in here, but I think he's going to take what the defense gives you. I think he's as smart a player as you'll find. He'll watch the film and realize he forced a lot of those shots, look for the open man. I think he's on a very talented attack line. Alex Simmons, I was really impressed with his debut. Finn Thompson the behind the back pass to Simmons, the stick skills, the moves. I love how they inverted Owen Hiltz. So you got Hiltz and Spallina and Simmons and Thompson all on the field at the same time. I feel like the midfield still got a lot of work to do. Jackson Birtwistle is their most talented player there. But look, this team is certainly, I'm trying to think of the right way to put this. There's a lot of new faces on it. There's over 20 new players on this team. They play Albany tomorrow, and Albany beat them last year, of course, at Albany. There's barely anybody left on this team that played in that game. I don't even know if you can call it a revenge game at this point. But there's definitely more talent on this team, and they were fun to watch. So hell of a win in one way, Aaron, but certainly noteworthy in others. So busy weekend for them. The men's team will host Albany Friday and Holy Cross on Super Bowl Sunday. 6:00 face-off Friday night, 1:00 face-off, I believe, or is it noon? Let me double check while we're talking about it here. But early afternoon, so we can have plenty of time to make the guacamole dip for Super Bowl Sunday coming up here. So looking at the schedule, 6:00 face-off Friday and 1:00 face-off on Sunday against Holy Cross. As for the Syracuse women's lacrosse team, they will get on the field for the first time Saturday at the JMA Wireless Dome, and they have picked a heck of a game to start the season with, really two games to start the season with. To start with Northwestern Saturday, that's a noon start at the JMA Wireless Dome, the team that knocked them out of the NCAA tournament last year. Northwestern gets Izzy Skane back, who's one of the best players in college lacrosse, men or women, by the way. Syracuse had knocked out Northwestern the year before that in the tournament. Rivalries are a word that's thrown around a lot, but this is certainly, there's some juice in this series between Syracuse and Northwestern. And then they play Maryland next Friday, who is just a powerhouse in the sport. Syracuse has a lot of talent back. Megan Carney returns. Megan Tyrell, the preseason #1 player in the country. Emma Ward comes back from injury. Sierra Cockrell comes back from injury. They've added a transfer into the mix who last year, I want to pull up now. I don't know if they have the numbers here that I'm about to look up here, but give me a second here to find it, guys. Caitlin Mashevsky is back. Let's give her a shout out at the draw, the face-off in women's lacrosse, one of the best players in the country at her position. But a player I'm intrigued by is Abigail Lagos, who comes in from Indianapolis, a Division II powerhouse at the women's lacrosse level. They don't have the numbers that I'm trying to look up here, but she put up over 100 points last year. And we talked about a lot of the names that are returning, a lot of great talent on this team. She's kind of, at this point, it won't be for long, but she's kind of Kayla Trainer's hidden weapon here, the secret weapon on this team. Transfer that came in and didn't get a ton of attention. Emma Tyrell comes back from injury, another name that we got to mention there. So look, what this comes down to for Syracuse is they got to stay healthy. They just got to stay healthy. And despite all the injuries that they had last year, they still made the tournament, right? They still won 15 games. They were still a top 5 team in the country for most of the season. It's just they lost too many impact players to go as deep as their potential. If this team stays healthy, they can win the national championship. They're that good. So stay tuned, friends. 2 big games right out of the chute. Way to test yourself right at the beginning of the season with Northwestern and Maryland. It's going to be certainly interesting to watch at this point. Linda jumps in to say a lot of pressure on 18-year-olds being the #1 player in the country, playing first collegiate game with all of lacrosse. Watching him, the 22, with that tradition must be hard. Talking about Joey Spallina, of course. Certainly, as Scott notes, big weekend upcoming for lacrosse as well. Linda, I think that Joey is going to handle this as well as anybody. He's a great kid. He's the all-time leading scorer history of Long Island. His dad, Joe Spallina's the coach at Stony Brook. Big names in the lacrosse world. Joe coached in the professional world. Joey's been around the sport at a high level since a really young age. He has been prepared for this more than anybody, but you're still 18 years old playing your first game, right? So I think you're going to see those improvements. The talent is there. it's just all got to come together. Everything else about being a college athlete has to come together, but the talent was ever present on the field, and I cannot wait to see him develop and to see both these teams develop. I think we're going to have some intriguing lacrosse on the Hill this spring. So that's a busy weekend coming up. You got the men's team Friday, women's team Saturday, men's team back at the Dome on Sunday. Basketball is off on the men's side of things, but Felicia Leggett Jack's team, let's give them some love here before we say good night. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night for the day here. So Felicia Leggett Jack's team currently sitting at where are we at here? 15-9, 6-7 in the league. And boy, they've got some tough games coming up. So they're going to host North Carolina at the Dome tonight. It's a top 15 team in the country. And then on Sunday, they travel to Notre Dame on Super Bowl Sunday. Notre Dame, always a great women's basketball power. They're currently number 10 in the country. And then next Thursday at Florida State. So Coach Jack's team's got 3 straight ranked games coming. We mentioned Fair, who recently passed 2,500 points. Tisha Hyman is back from injury in this game tonight, so they're getting a little healthier there. I don't think Asia Strong is set to come back yet. She's trying to get over an injury as well. We'll see about that. Georgia Woolley has really come into her own. She's now had, I believe, 5 games over 20 points this year. Another Australian import for Syracuse basketball. Of course, you go back to Tiana Mangakahia, and her career speaks for itself at Syracuse. So home games for the next 4 days in a row. Pete Sala's crew is going to be busy. You got a basketball game tonight. You got to flip it over for lacrosse for the weekend. And then basketball on the men's side comes back on Valentine's Day. So very busy times coming up at the JMA Wireless Dome for sure. What do you say we end there for this edition of Orange Weekly? Always appreciate you guys coming back. Great questions today. Great questions, great comments. Spectacular conversation. Always appreciate it from you guys. So programming note, our next post-game show will be Tuesday night after Syracuse takes on NC State on Valentine's Day. I'll bring the chocolates, and we'll get together and we'll talk some Syracuse basketball after they take on NC State. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks for watching. Thanks for reading all of our work on syracuse.com. Got a lot of amazing feedback from you guys on my recent string of Jim Boeheim columns, agree or disagree. Right, Jimmy? My man, Jimmy, we talked to a few minutes ago. So I appreciate that one way or the other. Have yourself a great weekend, everybody. We'll be back next time on Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health.